I hadn't been back to Millbrook, Oregon in 15 years. Not since Grandma's funeral. Now, standing in front of her weathered Victorian house on Copper Hill Road, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. The lawyer's letter had been clear. The house and 20 acres were mine, no strings attached. Just my signature on a few documents, and it was done. I'd been living in a cramped Seattle apartment, drowning in student loans from a degree I wasn't even using. The inheritance felt like a lifeline, but looking at that house now, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, I felt something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Dread, maybe, or recognition. I grabbed my duffel from the rental car and walked up the steps. Each one creaked under my weight, announcing my arrival. The brass key the lawyer gave me was heavy and cold in my hand. It turned smoothly, and the door opened with a low groan. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered. The floral wallpaper, the grandfather clock that never worked, the smell of lavender and old wood, and something else, something dark and earthy that made my stomach tighten. I dropped my bag in the hallway and walked through the first floor. In the kitchen, Grandma's teacups still hung on their hooks. In the living room, that ugly green sofa sat against the wall like it had been waiting for me. And in the study, her private sanctuary where I'd never been allowed as a child, shelves groaned under the weight of books, journals, and strange objects I didn't recognize. That's where I found the first journal. It was sitting on the desk, right in the center, as if someone had placed it there for me to find. The leather cover was cracked and worn. When I opened it, I recognized Grandma's handwriting immediately, those careful slanted letters I'd seen on birthday cards for years. The first entry was dated 6 months before she died. They're back in the clearing. I can hear them at night. After all these years, I thought maybe they'd forgotten. But they remember. They always remember. I flipped through more pages. Most of it was normal. Grocery lists, garden notes, doctor appointments. But scattered throughout were other entries that made my skin crawl. Found 3 more stones arranged in a circle near the old oak. Same pattern as before. I scattered them, but I know it won't matter. They'll just come back. The Hadley boy went missing last week. Police say he ran away. They're wrong. I saw the marks on the trees, the same marks from 1987. I should have told Sarah the truth, but how do you tell a child that some doors, once opened, can never be closed? How do you explain that her bloodline makes her a keeper, whether she wants it or not? I closed the journal, my hands shaking. Grandma had been old, maybe confused. This was probably nothing, just the confused thoughts of an elderly woman living alone. But as the sun set and shadows stretched across the study floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The next morning, I drove into town for supplies. I needed basics: food, cleaning supplies, maybe a new lock for the back door that didn't close properly. Millbrook looked exactly the same as I remembered. One main street, a handful of shops, mountains rising in the distance like silent guardians. I parked in front of Becker's Market and went inside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A radio behind the counter played oldies. The cashier was a woman about my age with tired eyes and a name tag that read Michelle. She looked up as I approached with my basket. "You're Sarah Chen." It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, surprised. "Do I know you?" "Michelle Carpenter. We were in the same summer program at the library when we were kids. You probably don't remember." I didn't, but I smiled anyway. "I'm back to deal with my grandmother's house." Something flickered across Michelle's face. Sympathy? Fear? It was gone before I could identify it. "I'm sorry about Mrs. Chen," she said, scanning my items. She was a good woman. Kept to herself mostly, but good. "Did you see her much? Before she died?" Michelle's hands paused over a can of soup. "Not really. She came in every Thursday morning, bought the same things. Near the end, though." She trailed off. "Near the end what?" She glanced around the empty store, then leaned closer. She seemed scared, kept asking if I'd heard anything strange at night, if anyone had reported seeing lights in the woods. I thought maybe she was getting senile, you know? But now what? Michelle shook her head. "Nothing. That'll be $47.50. I paid and was loading bags into my car when a man approached. He was in his 60s, wearing a sheriff's uniform that had seen better days. His face was weathered and serious. "Sarah Chen?" he asked. "That's me. Sheriff Tom Bridges, got a minute?" I nodded, and he gestured toward the diner across the street. We sat in a booth by the window, and he ordered coffee for both of us without asking if I wanted any. "I knew your grandmother," he said when the waitress left. "Respected her. She was one of the old families here, one of the ones who remembered." "Remembered what?" He studied me for a long moment. "How much did she tell you about Millbrook's history?" "Not much. I spent summers here as a kid, but she mostly kept me close to the house. We'd bake, work in the garden, read books. She never talked about the town much." Sheriff Bridges nodded slowly. "That sounds like her. Protective." He sipped his coffee. "There are things about this town that don't make it into the tourist brochures, things that go back a long way. Your grandmother was part of that history, whether she wanted to be or not." "I don't understand. The clearing on your property, about a mile into the woods, past the old oak. You know it." I shook my head. "Grandma never let me go into the woods alone. Smart woman." He leaned forward. "In 1952, 6 people disappeared in those woods over the course of 3 months. All adults, all locals. They found 4 of the bodies eventually, arranged in a circle in that clearing. The other 2 were never found." My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "What does this have to do with my grandmother?" "Her mother, your great-grandmother, was one of the 6. They found her body in the center of the clearing. The official report said animal attack, but..." He shook his head. "There are no animals in North America that could have done what was done to those bodies." I felt cold. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because 3 days ago, we found symbols carved into trees near your property line. Same symbols that were found in 1952. And last night, the Henderson girl didn't come home. She's 17, on the cross-country team. Went for a run yesterday evening and never came back." "You think she's in the woods? On my property?" "I think," Sheriff Bridges said carefully, "that you should be very careful. Don't go into the woods alone. Don't go into the clearing at all. And if you hear anything strange at night, voices, singing, whatever, don't investigate. Call me immediately." He slid a card across the table with his personal cell number on it. "And Sarah? Your grandmother spent her whole life keeping something contained. I don't know what exactly, but whatever it is, it might not stay contained now that she's gone." I drove back to the house with Sheriff Bridges' words echoing in my head. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as small-town superstition. But another part, the part that had read Grandma's journal, knew there was something more. I spent the afternoon cleaning, trying to keep busy. I opened windows to air out the rooms. I swept floors and wiped down counters. I avoided the study and the journals I knew were waiting for me there. As the sun began to set, I realized I hadn't seen a single neighbor. No cars passed on the road. No lights appeared in the distance. Grandma's house sat alone on its 20 acres, isolated in a way that felt deliberate. I made dinner, canned soup and bread, and ate at the kitchen table while reading through papers the lawyer had left. Property surveys, tax documents, maintenance records. Everything seemed normal until I found a folder labeled Easements and Restrictions. Inside was a legal document dated 1953, just after the murders Sheriff Bridges had mentioned. It was an agreement between the town of Millbrook and my great-grandmother's estate. In exchange for certain considerations, the property would remain in family hands. There were specific restrictions: no logging, no mining, no subdivision, no camping or hunting. And one line that made my blood run cold: the clearing shall remain undisturbed in perpetuity. Access to the clearing is restricted to blood descendants of Margaret Chen, and then only when absolutely necessary for the fulfillment of their obligations. Obligations? What obligations? I was still staring at the document when I heard it, singing. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind in the trees. But it grew louder, multiple voices harmonizing in a language I didn't recognize. The melody was beautiful and terrible at the same time, the kind of sound that makes you want to move closer, even as every instinct screams to run. I walked to the back door and looked out into the darkness. The woods were pitch black, but somewhere in that darkness, the singing continued. And beneath it, I heard something else. Footsteps, rhythmic, deliberate, moving through the trees. I thought about Sheriff Bridges' warning. I thought about Grandma's journal, And I thought about the Henderson girl, lost somewhere in those woods. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and stepped outside. The night air was cold and smelled of pine and damp earth. The singing grew louder as I approached the tree line. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating tree trunks and undergrowth, but nothing else. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped immediately. The silence that followed was worse. It was complete. No insects, no night birds, no wind. Just absolute suffocating quiet. Then I heard the footsteps again. Closer now. Multiple sets moving through the woods toward me. I could see shapes between the trees, pale and indistinct in the darkness. I ran back to the house and slammed the door, locking it with shaking hands. I turned off all the lights and stood in the dark kitchen, listening. The footsteps reached the edge of the clearing around the house. I counted at least 6 distinct sets. They circled the house slowly, deliberately. I could hear them on the porch, testing the door. I heard them at the windows, though I was too terrified to look. Then the singing started again. It surrounded the house, coming from all directions. The words were still in that strange language, but this time I felt them more than heard them. They vibrated in my chest, in my bones. They made my teeth ache and my eyes water. And underneath the singing, I heard a voice. Grandma's voice, though I knew that was impossible. "Don't let them in, Sarah. No matter what they promise, no matter what they threaten, don't let them in. The house is protected, but only if you hold the line." I don't know how long I stood there in the dark, listening to the singing and the footsteps and my dead grandmother's voice. It felt like hours. Eventually, the sounds faded. The footsteps retreated into the woods. The singing became distant, then disappeared entirely. I waited until dawn before I moved. I didn't sleep. As soon as there was enough light, I went to the study and started reading through Grandma's journals systematically. There were dozens of them, dating back years. Most were mundane, but scattered throughout were entries about the clearing, the woods, and what she called the Old Compact. From what I pieced together, the story went back generations. In 1952, a group of townspeople had attempted a ritual in the clearing, something they'd found in pre-colonial records about the indigenous people who'd lived here before. They believed it would bring prosperity to the town, good harvests, protection from disease and disaster. Instead, they'd opened something. A door, Grandma called it, a way for things that shouldn't exist to slip through into our world. My great-grandmother Margaret had been part of the group, but she'd realized their mistake too late. 4 of the 6 had died in that clearing, torn apart by something that came through. Margaret and one other survivor had managed to close the door, but not completely. It still cracked open sometimes, especially during certain phases of the moon, certain times of year. Margaret had spent the rest of her life keeping watch, making sure the door stayed mostly closed. And when she died, the duty had passed to her daughter, my grandmother. Now it was passing to me. "The compact requires blood," one entry read. "Not sacrifice, but stewardship. A member of the family must live on the land, must walk the clearing at the new moon, must speak the words that keep the door sealed." It's not much to ask, considering the alternative, but it's everything. Miss even one cycle, and the door opens wider. And what comes through? She never finished that sentence. I found more recent entries as I read through the final journal. "I'm getting too old for this. My hands shake. My eyes fail. Last month I nearly missed the cycle entirely. I need to tell Sarah, but how? She has a life in Seattle, a career, friends, a future. How can I ask her to give that up to babysit a door in the woods that most people don't even believe exists? The Henderson girl came by yesterday, asking if she could use our woods for cross-country practice. I said no. I always say no. She looked at me like I was a crazy old woman. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm the only thing standing between this town and something they can't imagine. The final entry was dated 3 days before Grandma died. I can feel it getting stronger. The door is opening wider each cycle. I'm not sure I can hold it much longer. If Sarah doesn't come soon, if she doesn't take up the duty, God help this town, God help us all. I sat back in the desk chair, my mind racing. This was insane. Doors to other worlds, rituals and compacts. It sounded like a bad horror movie. But I'd heard the singing last night, I'd heard the footsteps, I'd felt something circling the house, something that wanted in, and the Henderson girl was still missing. I found what I was looking for in the back of the last journal, a hand-drawn map of the property. The clearing was marked with an X about a mile into the woods. Around it, Grandma had drawn symbols and written notes. Ward stones here, check monthly. Replace offerings at equinox. There was also a list of dates. The next one was tonight, the new moon. I had a choice to make. I could pack my bags, drive back to Seattle, and pretend none of this was real. Let someone else deal with the house, the property, the mysterious clearing in the woods. Or I could accept that maybe Grandma hadn't been crazy. That there was something in those woods, something that needed to be contained. And that for whatever reason, that job had fallen to me. I thought about the Henderson girl, 17 years old, just out for a run. I thought about what Sheriff Bridges had said about the bodies in 1952. I thought about Grandma spending decades alone in this house, carrying a burden no one else could see. I grabbed the journal and the flashlight and headed for the woods. The woods were different in daylight, quiet but not silent. Birds called from the branches, squirrels rustled through undergrowth, sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. I followed the map, moving deeper into the trees. The path wasn't marked, but I found signs of regular passage, broken branches, worn earth, stones stacked in careful patterns. Grandma had walked this route countless times. After about 20 minutes, the woods changed. The trees grew closer together, their branches tangling overhead. The undergrowth thickened, the air grew cold despite the sun, and I started seeing the marks. They were carved into tree trunks, symbols that hurt to look at. Not because they were graphic or violent, but because they seemed wrong somehow. My eyes couldn't quite focus on them. They seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. These were the marks Grandma had mentioned, the marks Sheriff Bridges said had appeared recently. I kept walking, and the trees opened into a clearing. It was perfectly circular, about 50 feet across. No grass grew in it, just bare earth packed hard like clay. Around the perimeter, stones had been arranged in groups of 3. In the center stood a single flat stone, like an altar, with more symbols carved into its surface. And lying on that stone was the Henderson girl. She was alive. I could see her chest rising and falling, but unconscious. Her running clothes were torn and dirty. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the strange light of the clearing. I ran to her, calling her name. "Can you hear me? Wake up!" Her eyes opened slowly. They were unfocused, glazed. She looked through me rather than at me. "They're singing," she whispered. "Can you hear them? They're singing and it's so beautiful. They want me to stay. They want me to sing with them." "Who wants you to stay?" She smiled, and it was the most unsettling thing I'd ever seen. "The ones who were here first. The ones who are always here. They're just on the other side of the door. It's so thin now, I can almost see through it." I grabbed her shoulders, trying to pull her off the stone. She was heavier than she should have been, as if gravity itself was stronger in the clearing. "We need to leave, right now." "It's too late," she said dreamily. "The door is opening. Tonight, at midnight, it'll open wide enough. And they'll come through, all of them. They've been waiting so long." I looked around the clearing and realized she was right. The air was shimmering, like heat waves rising from pavement. But it was cold here, so cold I could see my breath. And in those shimmers, I could almost see shapes. Figures, tall and thin and wrong, moving on the other side of something I couldn't see. The door. I pulled out Grandma's journal and flipped through it frantically, looking for the ritual she'd mentioned, the words that needed to be spoken, the steps that needed to be taken. I found it on a page marked with a dried flower. The seal must be renewed at the new moon. Stand in the center, speak the words 3 times. Will the door closed with everything you are? It will cost you, every time takes something. But it's necessary, it's the compact. Below that were words in the same strange language I'd heard last night. Phonetic spellings in Grandma's handwriting. I looked at the Henderson girl, still lying on the stone with that dreamy smile. I looked at the shimmering air, the shapes moving behind it. I thought about Grandma doing this alone for decades. Then I pulled the girl off the stone and laid her on the ground. I climbed onto the stone myself and began to read. The words felt strange in my mouth, like my tongue wasn't meant to form these sounds. But I spoke them anyway, louder and louder with each repetition. The air around me grew colder, the shimmer intensified. The shapes pressed closer, and I could see them more clearly now. Beings that looked almost human, but weren't, with too many joints and faces that were all wrong. On the third repetition, something changed. I felt it in my chest, a pulling sensation, like something was being drawn out of me. The shimmer began to solidify, becoming a grey wall that separated the clearing from whatever lay beyond. The shapes receded, their mouths open in silent screams. The door was closing, but it wasn't finished. I could feel it fighting me, trying to stay open. The shapes were pulling from the other side, and I was pulling from this side, and something had to give. I thought about Grandma, about great-grandmother Margaret, about all the women in my family who'd stood in this clearing and done what needed to be done. I pulled harder. Something inside me snapped. I felt it like a physical sensation. The shimmer collapsed inward and disappeared. The cold vanished. The shapes were gone. The door was closed. I collapsed on the stone, gasping. My whole body ached. My head throbbed. When I touched my nose, my fingers came away bloody. This was what it cost. This was what Grandma had meant. The Henderson girl stirred on the ground. Her eyes cleared, and she looked around in confusion. What happened? I was running and then... She started crying. I want to go home. I helped her up, and together we stumbled out of the clearing. By the time we reached the edge of the woods, Sheriff Bridges was there with 2 deputies. Someone must have seen us go in. The girl was taken to the hospital. I was questioned for hours. How did I find her? What happened? Why were we in the woods? I told them a version of the truth. I'd heard someone in the woods, went to investigate, found her unconscious. They were skeptical, but couldn't prove otherwise. Sheriff Bridges drove me back to the house after sunset. As I got out of the car, he rolled down the window. "Your grandmother did this for 43 years, he said quietly. Every month, without fail. Most people in this town have no idea what she protected them from. But I knew, and now you know. How long do I have to do this?" He looked out at the dark woods. "Until you pass it on to someone else. That's how these things work." He drove away, leaving me alone with the house, the woods, and the clearing I'd have to return to in 30 days. I'm writing this in Grandma's study, in a new journal I bought in town. It's become my routine now, document everything, just like she did. Maybe someday someone will need to know. The Henderson girl recovered, no memory of what happened in the clearing. That's probably for the best. I've been to the clearing 3 more times since that first night, twice to check the ward stones and once for the new moon ritual. It gets easier each time, though it still takes something from me. I'm more tired than I used to be. My hands shake sometimes. I've started seeing shapes in my peripheral vision that disappear when I look directly at them. This is the price. This is the compact. I've quit my job in Seattle, broke my lease. This is my life now, keeper of the door, guardian of the clearing, the latest in a long line of women who've stood between the world and what lies beyond. Some nights I resent it. Some nights I want to run back to Seattle and pretend none of this is real. But then I think about Grandma, about the Henderson girl, about everyone in Millbrook who sleeps soundly because they don't know what's in the woods. The door stays closed because I keep it closed. That's enough. For now, that's enough. Note, if anyone reads this after I'm gone, the instructions are in the back of the journal. The ritual is on page 47. The map is on page 63. Don't miss a cycle. Don't ever miss a cycle. No matter what it costs, keep the door closed. This is the compact. This is the duty. This is the price we pay. Sarah Chen Millbrook, Oregon, November 23, 2025.